Hello, everybody. Welcome to our webinar today on duplicate payment analysis and other ways to avoid overpaying and potentially also fraud. My name is Jens Kettler. I'm with VOQUZ Labs and responsible for the VOQUZ SAP security products here. So what are we discussing today? Overpayments and in particular duplicate payment analysis. How is this relevant? I tried to research some numbers on that. And the sources are cited here below: Oversight, Stampley, Liberata, Blue & Co. All of these are payment processing or payment analytics providers. So they have provided some numbers on the amount of duplicate payments that they found in their customer bases. And they say, and that might be overestimated, let's be frank, it's consulting and service companies. They say it's around 0.5 to 0.1 to 0.5%. Let's say it's 0.1%. So 1 out of 1,000 invoices is paid twice, roughly. How can that happen? Well, you might receive invoices twice. They might be sent to different departments, to the procurement department and to the business side that is actually using the product. There might be wrong invoices that get corrected and resent, but without canceling the originally entered invoices. And there might be other ways. In particular, if you have manual processing of invoices, at least partially, then there are certainly other scenarios as well. And in many cases, ERP systems, in particular SAP ERP, fails to prevent or detect such duplicates, basically because there are slight variations in the invoice data. We're going to look at some examples. And that means that you actually can end up with invoices that are entered and you would pay for the same goods or service more than once. There are certain areas where this is more likely to happen according to that research here. Certain types of projects, in particular construction projects. I imagine that's because you often have several invoices for similar goods or services there. Consulting agreements, quite similar. Consulting invoices probably always look kind of the same. And then also recurring payments. Maybe it could happen that you receive an invoice at the beginning of the payment period and at the end also, and they need to be matched. There are several measures that you can do to prevent that. It starts, as always, with data quality on the master data level, vendor management. We have an example where we can show this later in the webinar in a small demo that we do. Then monitoring of invoices and trying to match invoices, and that's what we discussed today. And what's also very important is compliance with the invoice process. I mentioned this example earlier. Invoices, the same invoice sent to different departments, and then they have different ways of getting the invoices into the system and into the payment stream, and that can lead to problems. Now, some of you will say, okay, there is an SAP standard report or SAP standard check that looks and tries to find SAP's duplicate invoices, and that's true. It does check on certain fields in the invoices, like vendor reference number or invoice number, the gross amount, that means including taxes. And we're going to see that this is one of the main reasons why invoices are wrong, because the taxes are not calculated properly or not added to the invoice in a proper way. So this SAP standard check also does not into account if a document is reversed. So you will end up with too many false positives, and it is not working across company codes, which is also a scenario that can happen, that invoices are entered 4 different company codes, but actually it's the same invoice. And finally, it only works on exact matches. So the invoices amounts needs to be exactly the same vendor, the same reference number, everything needs to be the same. But many scenarios will be different. We're going to look at examples, but it will mean that you have different vendors, different amounts, and different reference numbers. So this check will likely have many duplicates go undetected at the same time at a high false positive rate. So that's what we try to do differently. And of course, duplicate invoices is just a small part of what internal controls should do. If you want to get a complete picture, you can follow certain approaches, of course. In our tool, VOQUZ, we have an automation platform that tries to cover internal controls and automation of internal controls end to end. So it is an analytics add-on for the SAP system running in the background with a large library of pre-built controls. Some of them we're going to look at today. And they run in the background. They create cases for instance, documents that look suspicious. And the cases can be resolved, and you will have a full audit trail and documentation into the system. And this for different areas, not just procurement, but of course we start at the revenue side. Money goes into the company, and then through accounting to procurement, HR, payroll, and other areas as well. So we try to cover as many areas in the SAP system here with this pre-built library of controls. If we zoom into the procurement process, then, and this is kind of similar for all the controls, Stefan, maybe next slide, you see the whole procurement process is covered by such internal controls. It starts with the sourcing, so your vendor selection. We have extensive business partner screening, including sanction list screening built in, and then the whole procurement process from the purchase requisition, purchase order, incoming goods, goods receipts, vendor invoices, accounts payable to the payments. We have controls, and we focus just on very specific thing today, duplicate invoices and a few other examples that are covered here, like out of the box with the tool. So if you want to build this yourself, what is a good starting point? What kind of data do you need to look at if you want to detect duplicate invoices? Here's a short list. So each invoice comes from a vendor, and you should try to match vendors. Very often they will not be the same, but they might be similar vendors, and we're going to have a look at the examples there. Also, the analysis that you do should work cross-company code. You will look at invoice numbers, but sometimes they could be different. So maybe they need to be similar. And duplicate invoices usually are entered and have a correlation when they are entered. So they are entered within a certain period of time, let's say 10 days, 30 days, but not in different years maybe. Then the amounts, make sure that you properly handle, in particular, value-added taxes. So use net amounts and have a look at the line items. What we can do is we can monitor and detect such cases. We can also block invoices that are suspicious, and like that have a very fast way of reacting to data in the system and helping you to resolve the issues. So let's look into the system and look at some examples. So here I've logged into the SAP demo system. As I mentioned before, it's an add-on that we use here that's in the SAP system. On the left-hand side, you can see the different areas where we have internal controls automated. I go to procurement, and you see all the internal controls that we have in the system here for the procurement process. And let's look at duplicate invoices. We have a few examples prepared here, and I'm going to share 2 or 3 of the scenarios and how the typical errors, so to say, look like. Here's one example, kind of easy start. On the right-hand side, you see the details of the 2 invoices. Invoice number 1 here, this is the document number, and it's from vendor Lewis's bike parts. Same vendor here for the second invoice, different invoice number here, different document number, but same invoice number and different amount. And then you can go click on the documents, and you will see the different line items. And let's just see it's these 2 line items here. And if you compare this with the document numbers in the other document, it's different. And what's different here is that the sales taxes or VAT was included in one line item in the previous invoice, and it's separate here. So that means you have actually the same gross amount, but different net amounts. So the check looks at these things, and even if the amounts are different, if the line items are different, it will be detected. Now here, let's look at the more interesting case. One invoice entered for 2 different vendors. So the vendor number here, 2500, 2501. For the human eye, looks like similar vendor. Probably you have an issue in the master data. I mentioned that before. bad master data often is the root cause for these issues as well, and good master data can prevent these issues. So here the vendor was created twice and the invoice was entered for the two different but same vendors here in this case. And the invoice is really the same and the amounts are the same, but the logic here is such that you can check the parameters here. We can check on the vendor name, and we allow that's here actually that the vendor name and the vendor number can be different. In particular, the vendor name, you can have typos in two different vendor names, and we also have a logic that looks whether the company name is the same, but just the legal entity name maybe is different, because then you very likely have, in principle, the same vendor. And here's another example where the invoice details are really different. There's two different invoice numbers, so clearly two different invoices sent by the same vendor. And if you look into the document details, you see that you have like 3 line items and 1 separate line item for taxes here. And in the other one, somehow the 1 line item disappeared, the tax line item disappeared. So a vendor sends a wrong invoice, the declaration of the sales tax might be wrong. Then he sends a corrected invoice, same vendor, but different invoice number, different amounts, different net amounts in particular. But the analytics should be able to pick this up. So these are typical examples, and I think in particular wrong invoices due to wrong VAT or sales tax is one of the most prevalent cases where you have kind of duplicates in the payment process. If you're analyzing duplicate payments already, then my recommendation is also look at the one-time vendor accounts. We have different checks for that, and you can think about how you can do this manually, of course. But one example could be that the one-time vendor account, the CPD account, is used several times for the same vendor. If that happens, 2 times may be still acceptable, 6 times, and you see the details of the 6 payments here, certainly not acceptable for a one-time vendor account. So besides looking at the invoices processed here for different vendors, do perform checks on the one-time vendor account. And one thing that's definitely useful is perform a check whether an invoice was paid through the one-time vendor account to an existing vendor. And you can do this by cross-referencing bank account details if you pay through bank transfer. We already had this case that the same invoice was entered for 2 different vendors. So definitely something to look at also is perform duplicate vendor checks. This is also part of the product. And one thing I wanted to just highlight, because it can often go wrong and leads to many losses, is how you perform checks, that you perform checks on payment terms. And here's some example. So you can have payment terms for vendors in the master data or in a purchase order. It depends on your procurement process and how you set this up. And in this example, we did analytics on whether invoice payment terms are the same as purchase order payment terms. This example here, the system detected an invoice and the purchase order payment term allows for a 30-day payment, while the invoice payment term requires a 10-day payment. Now it has a discount, which is good, but you could also see cases like this. You negotiated or you ordered and you had payment terms that allow a discount, and the incoming invoice does not have any discount at all. So you basically lose 3% of the invoice amount. So duplicate invoices, CPD vendor accounts, duplicate master data, and payment terms, I think, are the kind of top cases to look at to avoid these kind of overpayments. So that's the demo. One last idea on what could be a next step here. If you want to test these things in your system, I mean, you can do it manually, export the invoice data to Excel and perform analytics there. Typical internal audit project, I would say. We also offer, and also together with our consulting partners, duplicate payment analysis also on a project basis. And you can actually test the tool currently for free for a what we call a quick assessment. We're going to select together with you like 10 different controls in this payment area: duplicate invoices, master data quality, payment terms. We're going to run the analytics in your own environment with your own data, and you will get results on the same day. It's a very quick and straightforward process, and in many cases we have detected duplicate payments, and customers were actually able to recover money after the quick assessment. So that's it for today. Now for some questions and answers.
Hi there. Thanks for staying, Jens, even though you seem to have moved.
Yeah,
thanks.
thank you everybody for your time.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thanks everybody for joining. We landed in the Q&A session now. So anything you want to ask now would be the time. If you think it doesn't fit here or it's too complicated, please send us an email to labs@voquslabs.com and we'll distribute everything to Jens or one of his colleagues to answer that. I've got two in that I'd like to read out to you, Jens. And the first one is, you mentioned something about normalizing and matching invoice numbers and vendor names. What exactly do you recommend doing there?
Yeah, so I mean, we mentioned scenarios where actually the vendor even could be different and the invoice numbers could be different, but you want to have them maybe similar. Usually like invoice numbers, they're usually just an increasing series of numbers. And but sometimes companies add certain leading or trailing parts to that, like a dash or slash and the year of the invoice and things like that. And sometimes this is entered into the system and sometimes not. So I would suggest to look at the format in which invoices are there in the system, for instance, and remove those leading and trailing parts, character strings. And the other example also was with a vendor name just now in the demo, where actually it was two different vendors, but the name immediately popped up like that's the same company. It was, I forgot the name of the company, but it was a corp dot and the corporation. And I think legal entity names are a typical example that you want to remove from entity names if you want to compare them, because otherwise you could have just entered it wrongly and then in a duplicate way. But you still want to be able to match that. And for entity names, usually the most important part of the name is the first part. So if there is a like a SAP SE, the stock company, German European stock company, and SAP Germany and SAP Spain, they all look so similar that I would say you want to see if these matches. So for instance, for entity names, you could just use the first part of the word and compare that, rather than, or the first word of the sentence, so to say, of the full name, and just compare that. Maybe that's not a complete instruction on how to do that, but it gives you some ideas of things that can go wrong.
And what to look out for, yeah. But matching that is, what about actually names or different nationalities, different regions, different languages, where you say there might be a different spelling, might be Asia, might be Russia, whatever it is. So how do you check that?
Yeah, that's even more difficult, right? I mean, if you have an Arab name, for instance, and you translate it into English or into German, they could even be different. And there's also no unique way maybe how you translate it into one language. Sometimes you have dashes and hyphens, and sometimes you leave them out. And so you can try fuzzy matching. I mean, one approach is to allow a certain number of characters in the two strings to be different. That's called, in the simplest way, that's called the Levenstein distance. That means if one character is different, then the distance is 1. If two are different, then the distance is 2. You could do this matching, and it's available in most of the tools, also in Excel. And you could say compare that, but use this fuzzy matching and try to catch those exceptions. There's more sophisticated approaches, but that would be a very, very basic approach.
Or might actually increase because we're doing business far more differently than we did years ago. So doing business with overseas, with Asia, with Russia, with whoever might not be such an exception. Yeah, I get it. I got another one here, and it says there are there are other ways to trigger payments, like down payments or recurring payments, whatever. Are they also covered in your analysis?
Right. So in SAP, it works like this. You have different ways how you can enter payments or how you can start payments. You mentioned down payments or recurring subscriptions. You can have invoices and so on. And it's always different how you enter them in different transactions. But the data always ends up in the same tables. In the old ECC system, that's BKPF and BZAC. In the new S4HANA, that's the accounting document table. And what we do in the analytics, and what you probably would do, is you would use and export data from that table. And then it doesn't matter how it was entered. You will have a different source, a transaction where entered, or a different document type, but the data is the same.
Excellent. That's it from the live section. Let's see if I see something that popped up in the emails. It didn't. I would say thanks for this, and see all of you next time.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Cheers.